If you follow this column regularly, you'll remember that last month described the first part of a delivery to the French Riviera. I'd made a poor start by running aground in the dark on the way out of Poole Harbour, and things didn't get better as the night progressed. My crew, Mick and Percy, although young, were not typical mileage-hungry unpaid delivery hands. Percy was a trawlerman, and Mick brought along his merchant seaman's discharge book. Mick was a tall, well-set-up sort of chap. Percy was smaller and came complete with curly hair, freaky, and a character which, while entertaining sharing a watch, appeared to have suffered adjustments by the temptations on offer in those days to the socially adventurous. The year was 1970. The boat was a 45-foot motor fishing vessel with a useful sailing rig, and we contrived to blow up one of the two engines halfway to Guernsey. We limped into the island, had the diesel rebuilt, and then pressed on. Like many of her type, the yacht blew along cheerfully on a reach. Running was a bit painful, and making useful progress with the wind forward of the beam was a non-starter, as time was an issue, so I made sure we had plenty of fuel. The inbuilt range was not great, but we added to it by lashing 3 45-gallon drums in the small cockpit abaft the spacious wheelhouse. We pressed these up with diesel and set course for our first bunkering stop in Lisbon. As we motored westward, a monster high-pressure cell settled over Western Europe. The chops of the channel diminished as Ushant went by, and we crossed Biscay in uninterrupted sunshine. Not a breath disturbed the glassy ocean. Only a long, smooth swell, reflecting some disturbance way out in the Atlantic, reminded us we were at sea. Chugging into the Tagus around midday, we marvelled at the insanely rigged sailing fishing boats and small traders still operating then under canvas. We bunkered, filled our bread locker with fresh rolls, and, business concluded, opted to award ourselves a night alongside. The subsequent run ashore almost proved a bad mistake. Roistering back to the ship at midnight, Percy was feeling frisky. He'd failed to score with a likely-looking lady in a disco and had cheered himself up by topping off his requirements in a dockside bar. 100 yards short of the boat, he stepped over the sea defence wall to ease springs and concluded an unsuccessful evening by slithering down a slimy slope into the dark water. Most people would have shouted, "Help!" but Percy just flapped his arms feebly. Neither did he start swimming as if he meant it. Instead, down there in the dim gloom of a distant wharf light, he just quietly said, "That's it then," and drifted away seawards on a ripping ebb. If one of us had jumped after him, that would have been 2 of us in the drink with no way out, so Mick legged it back to the ship for a heaving line while I encouraged Percy to hang on to a strand of seaweed that seemed to have attracted his attention. Mick returned panting before the seaweed gave way, and we hauled Percy out. As we rubbed him down, he swore to lay off the booze in future, but they all say that, don't they? Ibiza was the next stop, where the excesses of the crew ashore in a hippie commune the 60s had left behind were a disgrace thoroughly enjoyed by all. I'd just about recovered my general equilibrium when we ran into a full-blown mistral on our final leg a day or 2 later. The dry, dusty gale blew with spiteful ferocity, and the Gulf of Lyons was delivering its speciality service of high, steep seas. We were taking these on the beam under power with a well-reefed mizzen. I hadn't enough experience to know what a beam sea can do, and it should have been no surprise when an awkward breaker arrived halfway through Percy's afternoon watch. I was locked in the head on the uphill side of the boat when it threw us down nearly onto our beam ends. I gripped the bowl of the Baby Blake, which ripped smartly off its base. Bursting through the now horizontal door, the toilet and I ended up buried by a pile of cushions and other debris under the lee deckhead, where I also found Mick. "I wonder what's happened to Percy," he said, as the ship righted herself and we scrabbled back down to the cabin cell, with me still adjusting my trousers. The wheelhouse was empty, and Percy's yellow oilskin had gone from its peg. Hoping he'd wandered on deck for a smoke, we pushed open the door against the howling wind, but there was no sign of him out in the storm. Mick throttled back, while I peered frantically across the grey waste of the Mediterranean for any trace of our shipmate. I was giving up hope and considering the options for instigating a search when I heard a feeble voice calling my name. It was Percy, but it seemed to be coming from the sky. For a split second I wondered if he'd gone to his reward already and was getting in touch from Fiddler's Green. Then I glanced up and saw his mop of curls silhouetted above the wheelhouse. A man of few words as always, he announced simply, "I'm up here, boys." He had indeed been in the cockpit enjoying a smoke when the wave hit and washed him overboard. A few seconds passed as he thrashed around, considering his immortal soul, until, just as the boat began righting herself, a second sea had tossed him against the monkey island on top of the wheelhouse. The radar scanner had been handy, so he grabbed it for a free ride back to an even keel. Mick set the autopilot to head slowly into the waves and selected enough revs to keep way on for steerage, while I dried out our shipmate for the second time. The change in motion was noticeable. The violent lurches and death rolls of a small craft in a dangerous beam sea were now only a memory. Instead, she held more or less upright, rolling gently and nodding as she soared up the swells, breasted the peaks and nudged down their windward sides. We bore away just a little so that the mizzen filled to steady us, and the net effect was near magical. The boat was making virtually no headway, but we kept enough control to keep her bow up to the crests. If a sea that looked set to break loomed up, we steered across to dodge the worst of it. Between us, we kept this going until conditions finally took a turn for the better. A week later, I was safe in Saint-Tropez with the hands paid off. I've often speculated about what became of Percy, but there was no doubt that once he stepped ashore, the drama factor tangibly diminished. The technique Mick and I stumbled across is well known by fishermen as dodging. In the days of classic yacht voyaging with long keels, heavy displacement and unreliable, feeble engines, it wasn't considered a survival option, but things have moved on. In heavy airs and big seas, a reefing genoa rolled to anywhere near storm jib size is useless. The nature of typical production yachts now means that if they are allowed to fall beam on to seas steep enough to break, they are in with a high-level chance of a serious knockdown. Unlike their predecessors, they cannot take the seas on the shoulder by heaving to. Lack of a deep forefoot means they blow off the wind when a wave lifts the flat bow sections. The relatively safe option of running before the storm demands fit, rested crew and sea room. These aren't always available, but happily most of today's cruisers have a powerful, reliable engine. Using this, backed up by a fully reefed flattened mainsail to head gently into the sea like a fisherman, has become a practical survival option for the ordinary cruising sloop caught out without specialised survival gear by a summer gale. Don't be shy about clipping the helmsman on, though. Even while dodging, there's always the chance he'll meet up with a rogue wave, and he might not be as lucky as Percy.